So last week we went into 1938. The Germans went into Austria, took over Austria, immediately began anti-Semitic campaigns against the Jews. And then we had in July the Evian conference, where all the countries got together to discuss the Jewish immigration problem, whether they were going to take any, and the final solution was that they would not take any, so the Jews were left high and dry. So that is where we are at this point. So on August 8th, 1938, the first Austrian concentration camp was established at Mauthausen. Over the years, 120,000 people would die there during the war years. The most famous part of Mauthausen was that there was forced labor at a rock quarry, and what they had was, they would mine, I guess it was things like quartz or something. So it's mining, but it's not underground. So they're cutting into the ground. So eventually it's like you establish like a valley. So it's like a cliff of rock, and they're cutting into the rock. So they had a whole bunch of steps, and what they would make the prisoners do, they had 186 steps, and they would make each prisoner run up with a huge load of rock on their back, so something like 100 pounds. They had to run while they were being whipped. And if they would drop the rock, they would end up dropping it on the person that was running behind them. Okay, and they would crush their feet.
Obelisk.
What?
Obelisk.
What do you mean?
Certain rocks, they shape them. They bang them into shape.
You mean what? You mean like a monument in obelisk?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's all. But they weren't really doing this necessarily to get. They weren't necessarily doing this to get something out of it, right? The point of it was really just for torture. Okay, because if they wanted to get actual useful work out of it, why would they make them run up with it, and why would they force them to drop it? And people there often lost hope to the point that so many people were committing suicide by jumping off the top of the cliff that they were nicknamed the parachute flyers. That's what the Germans called them. The Germans had a very it was really dark there. Look at death in the concentration camps, in the extermination camps. Also, they would have they had all sorts of really dark humor, like they would we'll come to it, but they would force Jews to run through a specific road leading into the gas chambers. After they disembarked, they were forced in so they wouldn't be able to escape out the sides, and the Germans called it the Himmelstrasse, which means road to heaven. Okay, and in Treblinka, at the door to the gas chambers, they had a parochas that said Pislu Shar Sham Tzadikim Yivovo. So it's right. This is the gate of God, the righteous come through it. So they had an extremely dark sense of humor. That's what when you think about something like Daniel Goldhagen would say that were they forced to do it? Did they not take enjoyment in it? When you hear something like that, it's really hard to believe. When they were actually mocking people on the way to their deaths, it's really hard to say that they really had no choice and they were forced to do it. So you don't have to glory in the fact that they're dying. So this was the first concentration camp that we come to where they were really from its inception really began to torture and kill people. On August 18th, we mentioned this before about the Swiss government denying entry to Jews and asking the Germans to make Jews have identity cards with a J on it. So this would stop Jews being able to escape. This is one more instance of how exactly the Swiss stayed neutral during the war, which was not very. I don't know how many of you know, but they have these Swiss banks where many of those places where the Germans put some of the money that they stole from the Jews, and some of that money is still there. and Jews really have gotten a fraction, if anything at all, of that money back. So really, not only did Jews lose their lives, really, even the people that survived can't even get their money back, or can't even get any part of the money back from Switzerland. So in 1938, so we talked about Hitler moved to take over Austria. Now he started to complain about Czechoslovakia because in the Sudetenland there were 3 million ethnic Germans, and Hitler wanted it. He didn't necessarily just want it for that. It was also for strategic reasons, which we'll touch upon soon. But Hitler threatened military action. He used the same sort of thing that he used for Austria and that he would use again for Poland. He said that German women were being raped, German men were being beaten, and if nothing would happen, then the German army would come in and would take action to defend the ethnic Germans. So, from September 13th to 30th, Neville Chamberlain met with Hitler numerous times, and Hitler made many demands, and the most important being that he should get this piece of Czechoslovakia. So what Neville Chamberlain did, at this point, the world is extremely afraid that they're going to be plunged into World War again. So, so this is really the ultimate act of appeasement that would happen. And also, after this, really Hitler would prod the democratic nations into making guarantees to Poland, which actually involved them in the war. But they called the Munich Conference. So what they did was, they got Britain, France, Germany, and Italy, and they all met. Okay, it was the prime ministers or leaders of each one. So it was Mussolini, I think it was Daladier, Chamberlain, and Hitler. Okay, and so the Czechs, you would think that we're talking about giving back Czech land, so you would think that the Czechs would be in there to have some sort of a say as to what was happening to their land. So they were actually completely excluded. They had to wait in the hall, actually. They literally were made to wait in the hall. Okay? And what happened is that after the agreement in Munich was made, the British government called in the Czechs and said, this is what happened. We're giving away the Sudetenland. You have until this time to leave, and we think that's fair. And they had absolutely no choice. So the Czechs were obviously extremely distraught, but the entire world actually was extremely happy. France, Daladier thought when he would get off the plane, he thought that he would be ripped apart because there was a mob waiting for his plane. In fact, he was showered with roses. People were giving adulation that you've saved us. The most famous quotes from there are when Chamberlain returned brandishing the piece of paper. It said, "Peace with honor," and this is truly peace in our time. Okay, so that's the most real enduring picture from there. Yeah.
Where did Churchill come?
So Churchill at this point was, I think, First Lord of the Admiralty. So he was in the opposition at this point in time. So I don't think he was part of the government. He was either in the opposition or he was a minor.
When did he become?
He became, I think, in May 1940. So it was after the invasion of France, and they were losing really badly. So they got rid of Chamberlain then. So right before they lost. You want to say something? Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, so Churchill, we're actually going to talk about Churchill shortly, about what he said about Jews emigrating. It's not really what you think it's going to be. But in terms of the Czech Republic and what this did to them, this deprived the Czechs of the natural defenses of the Carpathian Mountains. It also meant that Germany now surrounded Czechoslovakia on three sides. Okay? So, and actually, upon inspection by German generals, the Germans said that they never would have actually been able to conquer Czechoslovakia if they had had to fight for it. So, just think about what would have happened if they would have said, you want it, go get it. and the odds are that even the German generals didn't really think that they would have been able to. So, and at this point in time, the other countries decided that they wanted pieces of Czechoslovakia. Hungary took a piece. I think Lithuania also took a piece. So really, all that was left was Bohemia, Moravia, and Slovakia. Was all that was left of the Czech Republic after this, after the dismemberment at Munich. In October 1938, Poland revoked citizenship for all Jews not living in Poland for more than 5 years. This was because Germany was trying to get rid of them. So Germany wanted to get rid of all Jews that hadn't lived in Germany for a very long time, and they wanted to expel them back to the places of their birth. The main people that we're dealing with here, people weren't really moving to Germany from the west, they were moving to Germany from the east. And they were typically called Ostjuden, which means Eastern Jews. And I believe it would make sense to me that most of these were from Jews. Okay? But the Jewish communities of the native Jewish communities did not take these Jews in. Even during the war in France, French Jews would constantly beseech the Vichy government to make a distinction between native French Jews and Jews that had ran there from other places, in a bid to save themselves. Okay, so that's also something that you don't... What?
It's not very nice.
No, it's not very nice at all. So this is actually going to be very important for Kristallnacht, which we'll see very shortly. So Poland thought that this would mean that Germany would not expel the Jews, but they did anyway. So what happened was they got rid of the Jews from Germany and they said you have to go to Poland. Poland wouldn't let them in, so they made them stay in a border town. Okay, they established refugee camps for them on the border. So we're going to see very soon how that affects Kristallnacht. Also at this time, the Vatican-controlled journal Civilita Cattolica, called Judaism Sinister, accused the Jews of trying to control the world through money and secularism. Also referred to the devil as the father of all Jews, and that Judaism is an evil and standing menace to the world. Okay, so again, really, I'm just trying to enforce what?
Pope Pius said that?
Well, no. Okay, so he didn't say it, but again, so
he supported that?
It's a journal put out by the Vatican, so you have to assume.
He lends his endorsement.
Right, but right, exactly, he would lend his endorsement. But you have to remember, at this time, it's still Pius XI. Actually, I remember that I mentioned that excuse me? Which book? What's it called? Which one?
The Pope Pius XI is going to publish a book.
Oh, no, you're right. Sui Generis, Humani Generi Unitas. Which was, I actually read today that that encyclical actually was really just going to reiterate the Augustine doctrine of witness. So even though it was going to say that what's happening to the Jews is bad, still they still have to suffer for rejecting the Catholic Church. So even then, even when Pius was going to take a step to try and speak out against what the Germans were doing to the Jews, still was going to revert back into the traditional anti-Semitism that they were Christ killers. And again, it wouldn't really, it really kills the message if you're saying, well, we don't think you should do something bad, but actually Neville Chamberlain has a really incredible quote. I can't even believe he said it, but he has an incredible quote that's exactly like that. I might as well just read it now. Where is it? I had it here. 1 second. Here it is. So Chamberlain said, "No doubt the Jews aren't a lovable people. I don't care for them myself. But that is not sufficient to explain a pogrom." Okay? So, yeah, I understand why you hate them, but don't kill them. Okay? So that's the guy that's trying to save everybody. Okay? So, again, the world doesn't really seem to disagree that Jews are a problem. The matter is really just what to do with them, or how far you're willing to take it. Yeah.
How much better was Churchill than Chamberlain?
I would say he was better, but again, they really, we're going to talk about it. They didn't they had a chance to let in more Jews in 1938 and 1939, and they didn't. And neither did the United States. So really, by the time Churchill became when he became prime minister, all of Europe was pretty much under German rule, except Russia and Spain. So there wasn't necessarily much he could have done. I would say that they didn't ease immigration laws into Israel. So I don't know, have any of you ever been to Atlit in Israel? So it's a place where they put people trying to get into Israel, like Jews that try to illegally immigrate into Israel. If they caught them, they would do one of two things. They would either put them in the refugee camp like Atlit, or they'd actually take them to Cyprus and keep them there. So a lot of the time they took them to Cyprus. They wouldn't even let them go into a refugee camp in Israel. They would just put them in Cyprus instead. So really they did not do anything. They did not exert themselves to any extent, I would say, to help the Jews, even Churchill's government.
But Churchill was there during January's reign.
Well, okay. So this is after Kristallnacht, but on November 24th, so this is already after Kristallnacht, okay? Churchill said that he does not believe that Palestine should be a primary refuge for Jews. Okay? So after Kristallnacht, so the whole world knows what the Germans are going to do to them, or what the Germans are capable of doing, and still they don't relax. And this is actually before they limited immigration. Okay? So even Churchill didn't really ignored the fact that Kristallnacht really changed things. I guess we should get to that. So when did Kristallnacht occur? So we're still in November. So what happened was, why did Kristallnacht happen? That's an easier question. Actually, it's a harder question. But why did Kristallnacht happen?
Jews.
Well, but there was a specific triggering event. I don't actually know.
I think it is.
Okay, but
Then why? Because I don't know. But I know what happened.
okay, we'll get to that in a second. But what is the specific reason? I'll give you a hint. It's because, remember we talked about Poland revoking citizenship of Jews?
They had that middle border.
Somebody killed somebody, yeah. That is true. Okay, so on November 7th, yes, a Jew from Poland who lived in he lived in Paris. His name was Herschel Greenspan. He walked into the German legation in Paris and he shot the third secretary. His name was Ernst von Rath.
Ernst.
That's right, Ernst. Okay? So this apparently was enough. Okay? So, right, exactly. Some people, I think before people had access to German archives, some people would say that it wasn't totally state directed, but now we know that Goebbels and Hitler authorized Heydrich to allow for spontaneous outbreaks of violence. So what they did was they issued orders about what you can destroy and what you can't destroy. So specifically, you shouldn't burn something. You shouldn't burn a Jewish house if it will set a German house next to it on fire. Yes, exactly. Thank you very much. Right. Okay? You shouldn't loot. Okay? So they didn't want them to steal their stuff. What?
You did loot.
Yes, of course they did, but they wanted them to not loot so much. Really, what they did was they really didn't quite as much as they could have. They really just...
My great-grandparents store.
What?
The silver store, my great-grandparents got the windows smashed in and stole all the...
Right, well, okay, so I'm not saying it worked. I'm saying that's... I'm just trying to say that this is clearly that they issued orders to control what would happen.
Control rioting.
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
By making them allowed to riot.
Right. Okay. And they specifically authorized. They wanted to arrest rich Jews so that they could get money out of them. Okay. So you mentioned broken windows. So that's specifically why it's called Kristallnacht. right? Which means crystal night or night of the broken glass.
Did they like root shuls also?
Yeah, they burned shuls. Yeah, do I have here? Yeah. So they destroyed 267 shuls, which is actually almost all of the shuls that still existed in Austria and Germany. Yeah, so they pretty much destroyed every single shul in Germany. Also, after, they would force Jews to go to shul and listen to Germans reading them stuff. And Germans would force Jews to sing. Remember we talked about the Horst Wessel song, which was the theme of the Nazi party? So they would make Jews rehearse that and then sing it in shul.
Did they just convert?
I don't know. I would assume that some probably did. I don't think it would help at this point, right? Because at this point, we'd already talked about how the churches had given the lineages of the people in their congregation, so the Nazis would know whether you converted or not. But I would say that it's probably not a stretch at all to say that people converted, thinking that it might save them, even if it didn't. So 7,500 businesses had their front glass shattered. So that's really why it was called that. 91 Jews were killed. Untold numbers were beaten. 30,000 male Jews were arrested, and obviously they were marched through the streets the next day, and people came out to look and jeer at them. And it was actually interesting because if the insurance policies would be honored by German banks, it actually would have bankrupted them. So the decision was that the Jews were fined 1 billion marks to pay for the damage. So they said, it is all your fault. You must pay for the destruction we gave to you. Okay. So what was the reaction? Okay, so here is a quote from I think it's a historian who was living in Germany at the time. So the realization that Jews were fair game was communicated to people who were not even members of the party. As a result, some allowed themselves to get carried away, beating down on the harried and defenseless Jews. Okay? So everybody joined in. It wasn't just members of the SA, it was everybody. And even if people didn't join in, people would gather around, people watched, people cheered at the destruction. Okay? The only real, and as we said, marching the Jews to concentration camps. The only criticism that was leveled was at the degree of violence. People were afraid at how violent the party was. People were actually afraid that the Jews would pay them back. They were afraid that now the Jews are going to get us for what we did to them. And they were also really angry that they destroyed so much property. So they didn't necessarily mind that they killed people or that they beat people up, but why'd you have to destroy stuff? Okay, which again just goes to show that the Germans didn't care for the Jews at all. They didn't even have a humane reaction to seeing them being beaten and killed. Okay. For example, to show that people really weren't just scared to speak out against what was going on, 100,000 people the next day voluntarily attended the celebratory rally in Nuremberg given by Julius Streicher, who we said wrote Der Stürmer. Okay, and the overwhelming majority of men and women could have stayed away, okay, without risking reprisal. Okay, they could have stayed away. They didn't have to go and give their okay to the government, but they did anyway. Okay? And you must say from that they agreed with what happened. Okay? And what was the message of Kristallnacht? So this is from a member of the Hitler Youth. His name was Alfons Hepp. So he said, after Kristallnacht, no German old enough to walk could plead ignorance of the persecution of Jews. And no Jew could harbor the delusion that Hitler wanted Germany anything but Judenrein, which means empty of Jews. Okay? Göring himself said, I would not like to be a Jew in Germany. People seem to think that the Holocaust, it wasn't the regular German, the everyday German, or there weren't everyday Germans that it was their fault, and that nobody else had a fault in it also. but we're going to see that Germans used a lot of auxiliaries that were from other nations. They used Ukrainians at all the extermination camps, specifically the Ukrainians. Excuse me? That they're having right now. Yeah, the guy they brought in on a stretcher. Yeah, that's this week. They started it.
He was like in pain all day.
No, but he was a translator for the Einsatzgruppen, for the roving extermination squads. But apparently he didn't take part in anything.
He was there.
If you read the article, he might have known about it. Yeah.
He might have known.
He knew about it. There's no way he didn't know about it.
He partook.
They don't have evidence that he partook.
Obviously.
They don't have evidence. I mean, so it's kind of hard for them to do anything to him. It looks like a terrible scene when you bring in a guy in a stretcher, and so he gets a little sympathy out of that, I would say. But so also in November, Hitler met with the South African Minister for Economics and said that in the event of war, all the Jews in Europe would be killed. Okay, so he said it now. He would say it in public soon, as we'll see. What? Hitler. Okay, so we mentioned that Churchill at this point decided that Palestine should not be a primary refuge for Jews, but Britain did allow what was called the Kinder transport. Okay? I don't know if any of you know. Right, so they think it's to England. Right, so Britain allowed in 10,000 unaccompanied children. Okay, they actually, I believe it was the Jewish agency, but they tried to get 21,000 Jewish children into Palestine. They wouldn't let them. But they did allow 10,000 Jewish children into Britain. Okay, at this point, and most of these children never saw their families again. Okay, so they were specifically German children. On December 3rd, all the Jews' businesses were confiscated and declared Aryanized. Okay, so now Jews have nothing, and we enter 1939. So we were talking a little bit about America. So let's talk something about the anti-Semitism in America. A Roper poll. 53% of the respondents said that Jews were different and required social and economic restrictions. Okay? So that they should have some sort of thing that was occurring in countries in Europe. They should have rights taken away from them. They shouldn't be allowed to have free reign in the economy. A Gallup poll said 83% of Americans opposed admission of more Jewish refugees. Okay? So Americans did not want to let any more Jews in. There also was an extreme amount of propaganda. For example, I saw it's a poster and it's got a Statue of Liberty, and she's got a very obviously, it's supposed to be that she has a very Jewish nose, and the poster says, "Communism is Jewish, boycott the Jew." Like, do you want America to turn into this? Okay? So again, a lot of the anti-Semitism that was occurring in Europe, just enough, there was a fair bit happening in America as well. Okay. At this point in time, we're going to talk more about that soon, because they tried to pass, some people tried to pass bills allowing more Jews in, and it didn't work.
Anything happened to Jews in America?
I mean, they suffered anti-Semitism, but I don't think it was anything. I mean, like if any of your older relatives talk about going to school here, like my grandfather says, like he got, people said things to them, like calling them Christ killers and things like that. But I don't.
What about like the rest?
What? What do you mean?
The rest?
Oh no, I don't think. Yeah, there wasn't state-instituted anti-Semitism. Even though, I mean, Roosevelt didn't really do anything either, is what we're going to talk about. But something more on just about the way the Nazis conducted themselves. The Nazis wanted to increase the amount of German people. So the women's battlefield was claimed to be the home. So SS men were ordered to impregnate their wives, and they were ordered to act as conception assistants to childless women over the age of 29. Okay? As well, medals were awarded to women if they had a certain number of children. If they had 5, they got a bronze type of this medal. If they had 7, they had got silver, and if they had 9, they got gold. Cubic zirconia, exactly. But again, so this is just their ideology was all-encompassing and was really for the German nationhood, the Aryan Superman. In January, excuse me?
Teutonic Superman.
Well, yes, Aryan Teutonic. I think they're slightly interchangeable. In January, so illegal immigration began to Palestine because they weren't getting in legally. So 20,000 Jews would illegally immigrate to Palestine by 1940. Ships, I don't know if you may have heard, like the SS Patria. So that ran aground, and they captured all the Jews that were trying to get in, and they sent them to, as I mentioned before, some of them were kept in Atlit, a lot of them were sent to Cyprus.
Why Cyprus?
Well, it was a British possession, and it was in the area, and it wasn't Israel. That was the point. The point was you don't want to keep them there. That you got here, we're not going to allow you to stay. They even did that after the war. They would take them to Cyprus also. The whole point was that they shouldn't be allowed to be there. What's in Cyprus? No, I don't think there's anything specific about Cyprus in terms of they took them to Cyprus as opposed to another British possession like Egypt. But the point was not to keep them in Israel. Is more of the point that I'm trying to make.
Why did they capture it?
What? Well, I think after the wars, because they figured that they were going to leave eventually, and that they didn't want to allow there to be more Jews there for the Arabs to deal with. That's what I think. What?
They didn't want it because they don't need Jews.
No,
yeah, you have to have a. No, okay. For example, right, the Jordanian army, the Arab Legion. Who commanded the Arab Legion? I can't remember his name, but what was his nationality?
Montgomery.
No, it wasn't Montgomery. What? Serbian? Yeah, no, he wasn't Serbian. He wasn't Muslim either. He was Christian, but what nationality?
Oh, isn't like
British.
Yeah, he was British. The entire Arab Legion, the Jordanian army, was led by British officers. They had British equipment. Okay? Specifically, if you read books like O Jerusalem by Dominique Leperrier and Larry Collins, that's a great book about the War of Independence. Essentially, they were at war even before the Declaration of Independence. There was like a de facto war occurring, and depending on the outpost, right, a lot of the police forts were really important. For example, Latrun, right? You ever heard of Latrun?
Yeah.
So they weren't able to conquer Latrun in 1948, right? It was an old British police fort. Okay, I think there's still the old British police station in Svat has bullet holes in it because they fought over it. Those were specifically the fortified positions that would really allow people to control a town. So at that point in time, Jews and Arabs, they try to befriend, or they try and pay off the British in one specific place so that they would get access to that police station when they left and get access to their stuff. Right? The Jews fought with they fought with Piper Cubs for the first while. And the British and the Jordanians had Spitfires, which were British planes. Right? So I think the reason why they took Jews to Cyprus is they didn't want extra Jews to be able to fight when they left. I think before the war it was more out of spite. It was more that you came here, we didn't want you to come here, so we're not going to allow you to stay. You really want to be in Palestine, you really want to be in Israel, so we're going to take you out. And so that's why I think they did it. On January 30th, this is very important. Hitler gave a speech in the Reichstag. Okay? It was the anniversary of him taking power, and this is his quote. "Today I will once more be a prophet. If the international Jewish financiers inside and outside of Europe succeed in plunging the nations into a world war, the result will not be the Bolshevization of the earth and thus the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race throughout Europe." Okay? So he said it out loud, said it straight out. People did not take him seriously. And even historians today don't say he was serious. Even after they see what he did, they don't say he was serious. Okay? Very few people do. Goldhagen said he was serious. But there are people that say, he wasn't serious because they were still trying to get them to emigrate, which they did. They did try to get them to emigrate. But at the same time, when somebody says something like this, that really...
Go ahead, seriously.
Yeah, you really should. Especially after Kristallnacht, right? Kristallnacht happened 2 months before, where the entire nation went crazy, beating Jews and killing Jews. And so when somebody says something like that, you would think that at least the Jews that they have are in deep distress. That's what you would think. Anyway. He actually also had a comment on the nations of the world, which it's actually interesting in how candid and on the ball it is. "It is a shameful spectacle to see the whole of the democratic world oozing sympathy for the poor, tormented Jewish people. But they remain hard-hearted and obdurate when it comes to helping them." Okay? So he's actually smarter than a lot of people give him credit for. What he said is that you guys talk a very good game, but you don't actually care. Right? And in that vein, in February 7th to 20th, the St. James Conference occurred in London, where members of the Jewish Agency wanted to meet with Arab delegates to try and solve the fighting or the problems that were going on in Palestine. So the Jewish delegates eventually had to withdraw because the Arabs would refuse to meet them. And I think things like this also happened in Oslo, where Arabs wouldn't come through the same door that Jews were coming through. They wouldn't shake their hand, things of that nature. But the British supported the Arabs, so the Jewish people left. This eventually will lead to the white paper that we'll talk about very shortly. But in America, in February, the Wagner-Rogers bill was introduced in Congress to allow 20,000 Jewish children, again no adults, into the United States. It was actually tagged with so many amendments, so people kept adding things onto it. That's what they do now also, is that when they don't want something to pass, or when they want to say, if you're going to pass it, I want to get something out of it, congressmen put amendments onto it that aren't even related to the bill even. So the bill never gets passed because it has so many other things that nobody's going to vote for. Okay? So it had amendments, and also Roosevelt didn't support it. Roosevelt was actually renowned for, he was very open. He would allow people who wanted immigration to happen, he would allow them to speak to him. People who also were against immigration, he would allow them to speak to him. And he would give off the air of being considerate and being thoughtful, and in the end, he just let the status quo continue, which obviously did not help the Jews, because they needed something to change. So eventually this bill died on the Senate floor. And just to somehow put this into perspective, the wife of the U.S. immigration minister said, "The problem with the bill is that 20,000 ugly Jewish children will eventually turn all too soon into 20,000 ugly adults." Okay? So that's the reason why the Americans didn't want the Jews to come. Over the years 1934 to 1935, the United States would accept only 1,000 Jewish children. That is fewer than the countries of Belgium, Holland, Britain, France, and Sweden. Yes, that is rather pathetic.
Combined? Combined?
What do you mean?
No,
not combined. Each of those countries let in more than the United States by themselves. Yeah, it is pretty sad, especially when you consider how small Sweden is, how small Belgium is, and how big the United States is. Exactly.
Denmark.
Well,
they smuggled Jews out.
They did. They smuggled all their Jews out. On March 2nd, again, we talked about this, Eugenio Pacelli was elected Pius XII. Okay, and he would not be the most helpful of popes for Jews.
So is he going to become a saint or no?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. There's no real way to stop that. They won't actually, I mean, I don't know why they won't open the archives. I mean, I know why they won't open the archives,
There
but
are too many.
right. So that's why I don't think they're going to ever do it. But I think they are going to push it through. The thing is, even the popes that were very pro engaging the Jews again still pushed for him to be made a saint, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think John Paul was a very big supporter of making him a saint. Pushed very hard for him, and whenever Jews would speak out against Pius, he got very angry.
Like made like all the popes a saint,
They don't make all the popes a saint.
Special.
I think maybe they have some things. Well, they like to talk up about how he did save Jews, even though I think they might have saved some Jews, but they really neglected. Have you ever read Hitler's Pope? I don't know. The reason why I mention this, it's also because it's been in the papers in the past 6 months to a year. Michael Koren has written several articles about how anybody that criticizes Pius is wrong, and that the most preeminent historian of that time is wrong, and that John Cromwell, who wrote Hitler's Pope, really just has it in for Pius. Because he hates the Catholic Church. Michael Koren, I don't know, if you read the Post, he's been defending the Catholic Church rather vociferously lately. He's come under fire from a lot of Protestants, actually. But, so it is, I think it's a major controversy that's happening now. But I think they will be successful in making him a saint. I don't know, like the things you have to go through to be a saint, like, I don't know if they still do anymore, but you had to have witnesses to miraculous events and things of that nature. I don't know if they do that anymore.
It's like the miracle.
They still do that?
The reason Pius XII is important is because he really was instrumental in the development of the doctrine of papal infallibility. In other words, he's within the church. He's very, very, very important. So the church has an interest in.
Right. Well, I mean, that doctrine only came about because of things like it came about in 1870. It's not that old even.
Yeah, but he was the author of they put out a revised canon of church law, which formalized the doctrines and codified them.
Right.
So he was considered very, very important for the churches.
Right. Like the quote, "Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely," is a direct. It was a lord in the British government speaking specifically against the doctrine of infallibility, about how corrupting it would be. But regardless, I think he's going to be made a saint. On March 15th, the Germans occupied Prague and all of what was remaining of the Czech Republic in direct violation of Munich. Okay, so he made the Munich Agreement. I'm not going to do anything anymore. I'm going to leave them alone. He doesn't listen. The governments of the world do nothing. However, Britain and France immediately decided that they would guarantee Poland's freedom, because they considered, rightly enough, that the next target on Hitler's list would be Poland. Now, the only problem with this was that they're not going to get there in time to stop the Germans. So, at this point in time, they have to start currying favor with the Russians. And we're hopefully going to get to that right before we end, that they didn't do very well. What?
Hitler lied to them, the Russians. Tricked them.
Well, he did trick them. Yeah, hold on.
He gave them half, didn't he?
Yeah, we'll get there very, very shortly. Hold on. So on April 3rd, Hitler issued orders for Operation White, which was the invasion of Poland. So he's already planning. Okay, it's April 3rd. It's right after he's heard that Britain and France are guaranteeing Poland. They're saying this is the last straw. If you do any of this, we're going to go after you. He didn't think. I really think that he thought that they had absolutely no spine at all, and that he would go and they would give it to him no matter what he did.
They showed him they had no spine.
Exactly. Right. He had no reason not to believe otherwise. You're right. So, again, he began with the propaganda, right? People in Danzig, in the Polish corridor, that used to be East Prussia, they're being persecuted by the Poles, and something needs to happen. We're going to defend them if something doesn't happen. Okay? What?
The spew guy.
Something of that nature, yes. It's interesting how outrageous the lies were, and he just didn't care. What they did to start the war, the excuse was even more
He was a
outrageous.
liar, but he told the truth sometimes. Saying like he's a liar, and but he also shot. Like,
He lied for self-interest.
He also a straight shooter.
I think he was candid about certain things, but he lied for political gain. Like he lied to advance himself politically at this point.
Yeah, but like using stuff, he didn't lie.
No, he didn't lie about that. Because he saw that he didn't need to politically.
Yeah.
Here he still felt that he needed to do it politically. Right? Some historians would even say that he wanted a war. Right? We've already talked about how he wanted to fight them. He just didn't want to fight them now.
Maybe he had to at one point. He wanted to take over the world.
So I don't know how much of the world he wanted to take over, but he wanted to take over
Europe.
definitely Eastern Europe. I don't know how much. I believe he thought that Britain would eventually agree. Okay, after the war, so after they conquered Poland, there was no fighting for a while.
What exactly is he thinking when he started with Russia? That stretches from Eastern Europe to
I don't know.
China.
I don't exactly know about that. He got pretty close. German generals, they all read the memoirs of Caulaincourt, who was one of Napoleon's generals, who wrote about the winter of 1812. They knew what would happen. They thought they had time. It looked like they did have time, actually.
Saying no to him, and he's just like, yeah, do it.
What do you mean?
Didn't he give the green light? Like all generals in order?
They were apprehensive, but honestly, they were winning so much that I think they got caught up in it, and they thought, we're invincible.
They didn't actually win against anyone like with good army. France, like.
They did. I mean, I don't know. They even after they were losing, everything you read talks about how dangerous they were, and how even if they were retreating, they'd always be attacking, and that they never lay down. Part of war, I think some parts of war you need to be reckless. I think sometimes. I don't think they were very smart. Hopefully we'll talk a little about what they did, but they were extremely powerful army. So he's getting ready to invade Poland at this point. And again, the 6 months before the war started, they're all extremely interesting. The countdown to war is also extremely interesting, but we can't necessarily cover that at this point. On May 17th, so this is one of the things I really want to talk about, the MacDonald White Paper limits Jewish immigration to Palestine to 10,000 people a year. A white paper is a British government statement of foreign policy. So for 5 years, okay? So actually the government policy would work to keep it much lower. So it never actually reached 10,000. Okay? So they restricted Jewish immigration even when they knew they needed to get out. They also restricted Jewish land purchase, which I actually find very interesting. Why do they care so much if Arabs want to sell Jews land? What's the difference?
Claim ownership to it.
Right. Who cares though? No, well, I think it's more that they wanted the Arabs to keep the land.
True.
Because they had vested interest in having the Arabs win. That's what I think. Well, what do you care, really? Okay, fine. So even if you think, first of all, I don't think they were so sure they were going to leave, right? This is 1938, 1939. I don't necessarily think they know, after this massive war that happens, we're going to have to leave. I think they still think they can stay. So what they were trying to do was, they were trying in some way to limit the Jewish power there. I don't know if it was because they wanted to please the Arabs that were there.
They wanted to ally because they ruled most of that area. It's just like
Who?
India and Pakistan.
They
want to
yeah.
ally themselves.
Well, India and Pakistan was just India at that point in time.
Whatever. And they wanted to ally themselves with them, I guess, so they can build a bigger empire.
Oh, I thought you were going to talk more about Iraq
and
Jordan, which was actually somebody drawing on a map. That was Churchill drawing on a map. Jordan really shouldn't exist. Either way.
It's a weird country.
Yeah. It was really created out of nothing. June 1939, have you ever heard of The Voyage of the Damned? It's a movie about the voyage of the St. Louis. It's a boat that 850 people, they wanted to come to Cuba. But Cuba at the last moment said, you can't come unless you pay us an enormous fee for each person. So they were turned away from Cuba. So what they began to do was sail up and down the U.S. East Coast. But Roosevelt told the Coast Guard that you can't let them come. And even if somebody jumps off and you save them, you can't let them come. Okay? So again, even refugees that are in dire need, they got out, right? Okay, so they subverted your refugee policy. But you would think you would have some sort of humanistic drive to allow these refugees in.
And Canada was probably bigger than that point, right?
No.
No? They didn't control it?
You know what the Prime Minister said about Jews? Exactly, none is too many. That's William Lyon Mackenzie King for you. He also had seances with his dead dog. But...
We say like rather dead cows.
Excuse me?
So like rather dead cows.
What do you mean?
Rather dead cows than Jews.
Well, no, he said, what he said about Jews is that none is too many. So that he shows you how many Jews he wanted. So the ship had to return to Antwerp, and the passengers would be split between the UK, Belgium, France, and Holland. And really, the only real number of survivors to last out of these people were the people that were in Britain, obviously. The rest most of them were killed. On August 2nd, Einstein actually wrote Roosevelt that how concerned he was that the Germans were going to beat America to the atom bomb, and that we have to start working on the atom bomb right away so that we beat the Germans. Okay? So that is, right now we are in August. The threat for war is quite apparent, and we will pick it up next week.